You're listening to a Roddenberry podcast.
Mission Log Prodigy, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. Supplemental. Aaron Waltke.
Welcome to Mission Log Prodigy, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. I'm Marina Kravchuk.
And I'm Charlene Schmidt.
Usually on this show, we examine an episode of Star Trek Prodigy and give the old mission log treatment where we find morals, meanings, and messages and find out what we learned in an episode. But today, that's not what we're doing because we have a special guest with us.
That's right. And before we introduce him, I want to forewarn our listeners that we will be discussing the second season comprehensively. So not just the first 10 episodes like we've discussed on Mission Log Prodigy, the whole thing. So be forewarned. Spoilers!
That said, our guest is the writer and producer of Star Trek Prodigy, a genuinely all-around top-notch guy. Mr. Aaron Waltke, welcome back to the show, and thank you so much for joining us.
Hello, live logs and proper. Glad to be here.
Yay. We love that. We love that so much. And thank you for being here. And I would love to lead off by something that's been connected very heavily in the second season of Prodigy to you, and that is growing up in Indiana.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, Janeway grew up in Bloomington, Indiana. Where did you grow up?
So my dad's side of the family and my grandparents are from Bloomington. So that's
they really are. Okay.
Yeah, so that's why Bloomington is featured so heavily in the series.
I love it.
Yeah, I grew up. My grandfather was an engineer who worked with the IU psychology department. He also was the head usher of Assembly Hall for you college basketball fans out there. And my dad went to IU as well, as did my aunt. And so every Christmas and Thanksgiving we'd go down there, and eventually I went to Indiana University too. So I'm also a Hoosier in Bloomington. Nice. So yeah, I mean, I definitely, when Janeway sort of talks about those cornfields that she's that she harkens back to, I feel that very profoundly and deeply. Obviously the Midwest has a certain kind of allure, I think, in Star Trek mythos, like Kirk is from Iowa, Janeway's from Indiana. But what was especially interesting about Indiana in particular, or Bloomington, I should say, is Jerry Taylor, one of the co-creators of Voyager, is also an Indiana University alumnus.
That's right.
So when I was in college, I believe she had just donated her entire manuscript library to a rare book library we have called the Eli Lilly Library. And so I was able to check out her scripts that were annotated from TNG and Voyager, and that's how I learned how to write screenplays.
That is so awesome.
That is amazing.
Yeah, so it was an interesting sort of full circle moment to have the opportunity to work on a sort of a spiritual sequel to Star Trek that obviously heavily involves Voyager and TNG, because it was kind of a return to form, I guess.
Have you ever met Jerry Taylor?
I have not, interestingly enough. You know, she's well on retired at this point. And, I think she did come to a convention, I think, for the first time in a while, a couple years ago.
Yes, several years ago, and it was an absolute delight, I have to say.
I was busy making Prodigy at the time, so I didn't have a chance to go. There's one point where I think I was going to maybe be on a Zoom call with her, but instead I wound up recording a video message because she opened up some sort of I forget exactly what it was, like a specialized like private tutoring school or something in Bloomington. And they asked me to record a little message for her as a fellow Bloomingtonian and somebody who literally learned how to write from her words.
Thanks to her,
That is so cool. So the connection is even deeper than I realized when I was writing this question, just because there is so much connecting to Janeway and the season 2 lore. Like we see her farmhouse, or what is it? Is it the family estate in Bloomington, Indiana? Can you canonize that for us? Like, is this her place or her family's place? What's going on there?
I believe in the books they talk about how the family
Yeah.
house the Janeway estate was big enough that all of the kids could come and live there at the same time.
Yeah.
Should they be interested? I don't think the Janeways were particularly rich, or not that money even really exists in the traditional sense.
Yeah,
But,
that's true.
Right.
Her father was an admiral, I believe. So
Yes.
Yeah.
and if you follow the conventional wisdom of the Midwest, your credits will go a little further in terms of real estate. It wasn't that surprising. Like I have a lot of friends who their dad's a doctor and they own like an 8-room McMansion because there's a lot of farmland ready to be developed.
Yeah, because I have to admit, when I saw that shot of the farmhouse, I mean, quotation marks, my first thought was like, well, I suppose we have to out-chateau Picard Chateau. But, I guess, mentally, I was like, well, I suppose it is a multi-generational house. So it probably grew substantially over the centuries, if that's what it is.
Talk to any Midwesterner and they'll tell you that the house sizes in the Midwest are considerably larger than they are, on the coasts, because the land is cheap and the taxes are low.
So McMansions for everybody, all the farmland you could want. Yes. It warmed my heart, too, that Janeway was gardening toward the very end. We see her in her retirement that lasted all of about 5 seconds, just because that harkens back to Voyager. And none of this was your doing. It's not your homage to Indiana. This was already canon. And you're just calling back to it. But you really helped me understand what Indiana might be like through the visual sense of it all, just because I've never been to Indiana. I have no idea what it's really like.
Well, some of my fellow Hoosiers did call us out, and that they were like, that doesn't look like, like Bloomington itself is like a city surrounded by forests. But I had to point out, if you just go past 37, there is a bunch of farmland. And I would imagine there'd be a little bit of a reclamation, perhaps after the World War III or whatever, to kind of go back to an agrarian lifestyle. So I think it works.
Nevertheless, I do find it delightful that we kind of keep to that. The fact that Janeway is very proud of her, background as a Bloomington resident. The fact that we have that little plaque in her ready room, and it's absolutely delightful. Speaking of Bloomington, so I know that you were one of the supporters, the original supporters of the campaign to have the statue installed.
That's right.
I remember seeing your name on the list. So have you had a chance to actually visit the statue yourself?
Interestingly enough, I have not. I've been so busy working on Star Trek, I haven't had a chance to go back to Bloomington, because my parents live north of there now, and my grandparents are gone, so I don't have a lot of reasons to head down there. And usually when I do visit, it's during the holidays. And if you know anything about Indiana, it's like, don't drive during December.
No.
Because it's the snow is so thick, and it's just black ice wherever you drive. So I haven't had a chance to go there yet. But my hope is maybe if I get to go back, and my alma mater, IU, has asked me to maybe go back and lecture at some point, and I'd love to go back for that opportunity, and just to kind of see how the town's changed, see if it's any closer to the 24th century version that I've.
Is there a Janeway house established already?
Yes.
I would love to know.
Absolutely. Well, as you know, when Kate Mulgrew got to visit the statue finally, and I was lucky enough to be there for that particular event, she said she was driving in and sort of imagining, it's like, well, which one of the houses that she was passing by could be a Janeway house. So we're all on the same.
All right,
wavelength.
Somebody get going.
Yeah,
Build this place.
All right, so let's move on. We obviously, the one thing that we did want to discuss is, of course, the crafting of season 2. So, Char, why don't you take it away?
Yeah, certainly. One thing we've had a really good time doing on our show, and I'm sure every other show covering Star Trek Prodigy season 2 is doing, is finding all of the callbacks from the lore from previous Trek series, all the little Easter eggs that you all have been putting into the episodes. And I just got to know, is there any one that is your personal favorite? Because there's just so many of them.
I mean, some of them I honestly forget about until people are like, hey, wait a minute. And like, oh, yeah. And then I'll just have a flashback to writing it in 3 years ago.
Yeah. It's been a while now.
Yeah. But there's a couple that I'm proud of. One was, I believe you pointed it out in the latest episode, was a reference to a Jubalian omelet.
Yes.
Yes.
That is my personal favorite. I love it.
Even Jörg Hillebrand on Twitter privately messaged me and he was like, "What the hell?" But I remember I was looking for a classic Star Trek metaphor of, gonna scramble my brains like, or scramble my genes like, and I was like, well, like an omelet. And then I was like, where have I heard omelet before? And then I remembered that whole bit about Neelix and him trying to remember, or trying to figure out how to cook the perfect Jubalian omelet, and realized that he was using 6 spices when he should have had 7, and it felt like perfect kismet. And then, as I was writing that, I was like, oh, I want to lean, and I was like, I wanted to lean into that, and wound up folding that into as a metaphor. Literally, it was just for myself at that point. Yeah. And then, but of course, I should never underestimate Star Trek fans.
Yeah.
Latch on.
But it's perfect because unexpectedly it turned out to be such a great meta moment where it's like, yeah, we're talking, our 6th crew versus Majel getting at it as the 7th ingredient.
Yes, Majel is the 7th ingredient that sort of completes.
Yeah. Salt, if I recall, was the missing ingredient.
Yeah, yes. That's right. It was
and she is getting a little more salty, which I'm really enjoying.
So speaking of favorites, I mean, in this case, this is a callback. Generally speaking, I know it's like asking if you have a favorite child, but a favorite moment and scene, and I'm more curious, like from 2 different viewpoints, I guess, professionally as a writer. Do you have a favorite scene or an episode, not necessarily written by you yourself, if somebody else from the writers team, versus the perspective of a fan, you being a fan watching? I mean, I assume you sit down and watch.
Yeah.
Well, the whole thing eventually.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the strange diametrics, I guess, between being a fan versus being a creative on the show, it's a little bit strange because I have to come at it from a somewhat intellectual standpoint, and it feels somewhat mathematical of like, oh, I know if we hint at this, people will believe that it's Chakotay manipulating, time and events and communicating. And then we can have the big reveal that it's Wesley all along. But I sometimes am a little sad, I guess, that I don't get to experience that as a fan, especially as somebody who grew up on TNG and was the same age as Wesley and kind of tracked his journey. And when he walked off the show, into the great beyond as a traveler, my brain was like, but what's the destiny? You talked about the destiny in season 1. You said he was like Mozart. And I always just, myself and many other Star Trek fans was like, okay, but what is that destiny? Like, I get the sense he has great potential, but how is it going to be expressed? Yeah. And so I was quite proud, I think, as a fan and as a Star Trek creative figure, to, along with many of the other Star Trek shows and even producers on our show, to find a way to bring that story back and add a certain coda to Wesley and Beverly's story, because I think all of us were craving that, and we realized our show was the perfect place to do it.
I want to talk about this. When did you decide that Wesley was going to be really the key element to what makes everything work in season 2?
It was very early on in season 2, to be honest. When you're writing a series, you have ideas and you have a general loose structure of how you see this season or future seasons would take place, and what sort of big themes they would tackle, and important character moments and that sort of thing. But then when you get into the actual nuts and bolts of putting the season together, you have to take a moment and just sort of kick the tires and say, what is possible here? What are things that we could put into this season that we weren't even dreaming about 3 years ago? But now that we have season 1 complete and an idea of the trajectory of season 2, we gave ourselves a few mandates, one of which was like, we don't want this just to be a Voyager sequel. We want this to be an introduction to all of Star Trek. So what other characters from other Star Trek shows could we potentially bring in, or storylines from other that were left behind from other shows? And once it became evident to us that season 2 had to be time travel centric, it was baked in pretty much from the get-go, with the main thrust being like the quest for Chakotay, and Chakotay is not only trapped in another time, but another timeline, an alternate reality. We were like, all right, so if we're going to do this, let's do it. Let's go all the way in. Don't be mealy-mouthed about it. Let's explore this grand tapestry that is the Star Trek universe and get kids excited about it. Even if you don't understand it, that's part of the fun. It pushes the very boundaries of your understanding.
And you did. I mean, you did not hold back. You really went for it. And the more that we've been combing through each episode, the more it's just like, wow, I got to hand it to you all. I mean, you really, you didn't hold back.
A remarkable achievement. I mean, time and again, and I see a lot of people only now catching up when they finally binge the season, and they're like, "Oh my God, I didn't realize what I was missing." So it has been noted by, at this point, pretty much everybody I spoke to that this is some of the best Star Trek has ever been produced. I'm curious. I mean, how challenging was it to basically break this season? You said, you already had sort of an overarching framework for it, but how long did it take before you could, your team basically said, okay, I think we got it. Well, so now let's go into details. Like, did it take a while to kind of figure out all the little mad connections between all this tiny-whiny stuff?
Yes, I think anytime you have a show that deals with a really heavy, complicated plot, you have to be very precise. And this was definitely one of the headier sort of concepts that we always had to. My colleague Mark Guggenheim would always describe it as dancing through between raindrops, where it's a very you could easily over-explain things or have things feel too tied up in the gnarly crunchy science fiction of it and lose the plot. Or more specifically, lose the emotional core of the season you're trying to tell. And so I think we realized that we always had to have that kind of two-hander weaving through the entire show of like, let's have a really interesting, thorny, strange, curious science fiction concept that we can kind of turn over in our hands and explore the tropes and flip those on their head, and maybe even do something that hasn't been done with that on Star Trek before, specifically the idea that the universe is caught between two different quantum realities. And that in turn sort of opens a hole in the fabric of the multiverse.
These are not small concepts. That's all I was going to say.
Not at all.
They aren't. And you can imagine the first time we pitched it to the network, they were I think first we pitched a light pitched of Secret Hideout. And I think at about 20 minutes into our sort of quantum physics explanation, they were like, please pause. And then we had to kind of readjust and say, oh, that's right, we have to talk about the character stuff too. And so, I mean, that was always the sort of balancing scales we were dealing with. But I wasn't worried about it, because I was that kid that was like, if I was confronted with a thorny concept, I would stay up late thinking about it and unraveling it in my head. And a big part of this season was inspired by my personal favorite episode of Star Trek, which is Time Zero. And, that idea of sort of a time loop of just like, well, Data's head was 500 years older than the rest of him, but how many times had that time loop gone? And so is he 1,000 years old? 50, it broke my brain as a kid in the best way. And now I'm excited to hear reactions, especially on shows like yours, where I get to see others' kids' brains getting broken by the stuff that we're doing.
Definitely.
I am curious. So with obviously not, I imagine not everybody in the writer's room has, your encyclopedic knowledge of Star Trek trivia. So how was, I suppose, like, research part of it? How was it all these connections being established when somebody else was writing like their assigned bit? I mean, okay, this episode has tribbles. Somebody get me a primer on tribbles.
I mean, I will say it was helpful to have me in one of the driver's seats, because I do kind of, if I don't immediately know all of the stuff, I know where to find the stuff, or I know like, I think they dealt with this in Deep Space Nine in these episodes. Go watch them and come back to me. And obviously Memory Alpha is a fantastic resource as well. Just to, if nothing else, if you use it like Wikipedia, where it's like, okay, this can at least point me in the, to which episodes I need to watch. And then you can go back and read the scripts and watch the episodes. And it reminds you exactly how, merging warp bubbles work or what have you.
Did you get to involve? I mean, I imagine Dr. Aaron, being she's the scientific advisor. Did you get a lot of input this particular season on like all the?
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
That particular, like we were thinking about that amazing graphic that Wesley has, like
the timelines.
I suspect that she must have, she must have had input in that because it was just beautiful.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Aaron, God bless her, in the first season, she created a diagram of like, okay, this is how the timeline of what you have laid out works. And I was like, yep, that's about right. And then season 2 came along and she was like, all right, give me like 48 hours. And then she came back.
Only 48?
And it was the craziest diagram I have ever seen, but we followed it along with her. I was like, yep, that's what we wrote.
She did that in 48 hours?
I
know she's a genius, but wow.
I mean, she just wants to make sure that it tracks.
It works.
And I knew, partially intellectually and partially in my soul, I was like, this works, guys. Trust me. But I'm glad it was very validating, I think, for Dr. Aaron to basically retrace the steps of my insane brain because I was kind of the one left to keep all of this together in my brain to make sure that it tracked. Like the Hagemans aren't the biggest fans of time travel stories. I mean, they like watching them, but I think telling them it's
they're Janeway.
They're too much headache.
In true Janeway fashion, it causes a headache. But for me, I'm like, ooh, put me in, coach.
I'm glad you were able to keep this all together because it really is a lot to dissect. And not only do you have like the whole timeline might just be destroyed type of epic storytelling, but you're also calling back to a bunch of other things, to series and other concurrently in production. And so how much of a hand did you have in that process as well? While you're all trying to not necessarily get in each other's way, but like to collaborate when you need to maybe accidentally realize, okay, we need to make sure certain things are consistent. Like, what was this process like?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, I think I helped at least, especially when we had, 4 or 5 shows going at the same time.
Yeah.
I helped kind of facilitate, a system wherein whenever a new script went out, any draft of it, not just the finished draft, but like any iteration of any of the shows, Discovery, Picard, our show, Lower Decks, we would share that finished draft and have it sent to the other writers' assistants to disseminate. And our show, we assigned everybody one of the new shows to be officially in charge of, to read all the scripts as they came in and share what they were finding. And then also we assigned everybody a legacy show because I'm not a crazy person where I'm like, you have to have seen every single episode of Star Trek to work on this show. But I felt like if nothing else, it would be nice for everybody to, even if you hadn't seen all of Deep Space Nine beginning to end, like you take this as an opportunity, and to dive in. And, so Aaron McNamara, I believe, was assigned Voyager maybe, or Enterprise, and Keith Sweet was assigned Deep Space Nine. And so just that way everybody was getting like a nice sort of saturation. Like we were all kind of in the same hot tub, so to speak.
That's cool. So you assigned specialists basically.
Yeah. Just it emerged into some really interesting concepts and ideas, and then I think whenever there was something where there a crossover of such the biggest most obvious one being Wesley Crusher.
Wesley,
of course.
We had already pitched Wesley Crusher as a big part of our season, and we're in the process of writing, I think we'd written 6 or 7 scripts at that point and outlines for the rest of them. When Picard, obviously they were dealing with the supervisors, and they started to tie the supervisors into the travelers. Then they wanted to tie that, have the travelers be the mysterious benefactors that we saw on Assignment Earth, who sent Gary Seven to Earth to protect the timeline. And I thought that was a cool idea, but I was like, we just need to talk it out. So we got on several meetings with at first Akiva Goldsman, and then later Terry Matalas. And the first aspect of that meeting was like, okay, if you do want to use Wesley, I think that actually works fine because he is a omnitemporal being. He can be anytime, anywhere.
Yes.
But I think internally we should understand, where he is in his journey. What his role in the Travelers is, if they are taking this very hands-on approach as sort of like the invisible hand that guides the universe, and what this organization does, what its rules are, and where he is. And so I wound up creating this entire document that was about 7 pages long. that literally is like, this is every instance of Wesley and the Travelers of TNG. This is every instance of where what you're doing with the supervisors and the Travelers in Picard. Here's what we're doing in our show. Therefore, here is what I think his history is. And
okay.
And then everybody read it and we hopped on, and he was like, this is great. Yes. And then so he wound up sending, once he had written the scene, the cameo with Wesley Crusher, he had sent it to us, and I rewrote about half of his dialogue, especially that scene where he's talking with Corey about the role of the Travelers.
Yeah.
And, wound up slipping in some very subtle allusions to Star Trek Prodigy.
You did.
Like, I think at one point he says, like, a star is born, but a ship is lost. That's the Protostar.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, we didn't know what we didn't know back then. That was so clever.
Yeah, at first when it came out, people were like, what is he talking about? And then 2 years later, our show comes out, and everyone's like, what? It's like throwing a Hail Mary to yourself and running across the
And it's because you either had the luxury, I don't know if that's the right word, but we'll say it's the luxury of writing Prodigy right about this same time. And okay, you're talking about the Travelers, and I have got a lot of questions about the world building that you did for the Travelers, because really, I mean, we didn't have a whole lot of information about these guys. We got a little bit more in Picard, like the Guardians and that sort of thing. And you mentioned, you said that the Travelers are really hands-on, but I'm kind of getting the feeling, at least midway through Prodigy, they're somewhat hands-off. I mean, Wesley's the only one who's willing to step in and help fix this thing.
Right. If I said hands-on, I misspoke. They tend to be hands-off. So like so that particular aspect of their organization comes directly from the final appearance of the Traveler in TNG, which I think is called Journey's End.
Journey's End. Yes.
Yeah.
If you recall, there's a lot of world building for that. The organization is squished into a very, very small window of time, where Wesley manages to essentially stop time with the power of his mind. The Traveler emerges.
The Wesler. I love it.
That's Wesler. The Traveler emerges and said, this is you finally embracing your potential. You did this by yourself, Wesley. You have this ability to use the power of time, space, and thought. And then Wesley rightfully looks to his friends who are in immediate danger. It freeze frames this firefight between Cardassians and the Starfleet and stuff, and like he's like, we have to help them, and the Traveler says, no, you have to let them figure some things out for themselves. That is our way, and so you have to listen very carefully. It's like if you extrapolate that outward, it suggests that they try to be a little bit more of almost like a gardener who would rather allow the wild plants to grow, kind of, to use sort of a gardening metaphor. And we thought that was very interesting because it's also a little bit contradictory, because the question is then, when can you step in and when can't you? And that's something that also was sort of touched upon with Gary Seven and Assignment Earth. It was just like, okay, if your job is just to not interfere and just to watch, like when do you
do you even have a job?
It's basically like Prime Directive just taken to the extreme.
And so we thought that was a really interesting contradiction, similar to the Prime Directive, that we wanted to explore a little bit, where and perhaps put a little bit of stakes to it all, and that's where the idea of the loom coming in as this sort of natural force, that was truly unknown and forbidding and foreboding, I should say, and terrifying, that that they naturally evolved many of the same powers that the travelers did, but they they can only enter our universe when things are truly dire and perhaps lost. So you hear a little bit of the conversation that I had written for Eric Menyuk to reprise his role of the travelers. When you hear the whispers between him and Wesley as they enter, where it kind of lays out a little bit of like, this is beyond us. The multiverse is much bigger than this one particular timeline. It's selfish of us in a way to try to stay behind and sacrifice ourselves and not tend to the greater fabric of and tapestry of the dimensions of time, space, and thought. And I was like, it's a classic kind of not seeing the forest through the trees sort of scenario, where, from one perspective, yes, if you take that the needs of the many kind of perspective too far out, you lose track of the importance of the one. Yes. And I think that Wesley is the kind of counterweight to that. And, his willingness to put in the work instead of just stay in those sort of esoteric greater good ideas is what winds up being great strength.
We've delved into all of this in our discussion of the devourer of all things, the needs of the many versus the needs of the few, who is looking out for whom and why. And then also the contradiction it seems with the travelers, like, they want to let things be, and yet, okay, Wesley's going to step in. Does he have the right to do that? Should he do that? Why is he doing that? So, okay, we're totally falling in line with the psychology of what we're supposed to be going through. But I want to talk about Eric Menyuk. You mentioned him. He was the original Traveler.
Yes.
Way back in TNG season 1. And I think you mentioned that he had retired.
Yes, for people that may not be aware, Eric Menyuk was in the running to play Data. He was like the front runner until Brent Spiner came along and perhaps rightfully got the part. But they loved his interesting performance so much that they wrote this role for him of the Traveler. And after the Traveler, to my knowledge, I don't think he did much of any acting after that. And then retired shortly thereafter. Since became a lawyer and, kind of had a whole other life in the 30 years since he performed that role. And so when it came to, we're like, we wanted to have lines here that would kind of elucidate some of the backstory of what happened to the Travelers in between Wesley and the Traveler. We were like, well, let's see if we can get Eric back and record some new lines that could be there. And it was actually kind of hard to track him down because it's not like he had an agent anymore.
Right.
I think we wound up like calling his law offices and leaving some messages.
Wow.
And then somebody who knew somebody eventually got us his number. And at first he was a little reticent to come back because it had been so long. He was like, when I first played him, I was like in my 20s, and I'm like, his voice is very deep now. And he was like, I don't know if I can still play that sort of ethereal, wispy kind of character. And I was like, we'll get you there. We'll try. And so I actually queued up a bunch of his greatest hits as the Traveler, and played them for him in the booth. And so like he was able to kind of key his performance up to be exactly as it was 30 years ago.
Amazing.
Amazing. Yeah, absolutely.
And we were able to push the character in places that he hadn't been before. Because, we were like, we want the traveler to be somewhat scared here, or frightened. And he's like, oh, I've never seen the traveler frightened before because he's so above it all. And I'm like, I know exactly. What makes the traveler afraid?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of travelers, and seeing that at the end of this season, Prime Universe timeline is set to rights, Wesley worked it out. Do you imagine the remaining travelers, the ones who fled, had returned, or is it just Wesley that's basically, now keeping track of the balance just within just that one little timeline?
He's in charge now.
Where mom lives, yeah.
That's the question, isn't it? I like to think that perhaps at least his traveler, his mentor, came back and sort of congratulated him and admitted perhaps that even he was slightly short-sighted and Wesley was right, that perhaps some universes are worth fighting for and taking the risk for. Because I think that's really where the whole line is for them, is that idea of where calculated risk it should lie, and where you should retreat, to make a tactical retreat versus intervene and risk exposure to creatures like the Loom. And so I like to think that perhaps his mentor came back and admitted, the student has become the master in a way. But I also think that Wesley, it's perhaps on him to start rebuilding the travelers. And that's why we see him conscript Kore in Picard season 2, is that he is the sort of overseer of this organization, for better or worse. And as he states in our show, after the temporal wars ended, there aren't exactly like time agents everywhere, doing this work. So he has to do it himself. But Wesley, as we know, doesn't mind rolling up his sweater sleeves if he has to.
No, the sweater references were absolutely brilliant. Loved that so much. All right. Well, we know we don't have you for too much longer. So how about we look ahead just a tiny bit, as much as we can? And I know you can't probably talk specifics, but do you have any inkling of how the show performed in July when season 2 dropped on Netflix? Have you gotten any feedback on that?
So Netflix keeps all their data pretty private, but what I can say is that it did crack the top 10 in I think 20 plus countries, and it got pretty close to that in America. And I believe the Blu-ray and digital sales it was the number one sci-fi Blu-ray. Like we were beating like Furiosa and stuff.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Awesome. Yeah.
So and digital sales, I think it got into the top 10 in America and number 1 in Canada, on Apple iTunes.
Awesome.
So I think that, for a show like ours, it's always about a slow roll and a slow snowball of sorts. Yeah. That where that word of mouth spreads, and people that perhaps hadn't checked it out or were lucky to check it out, finally the dam breaks and they do, and they're like, this is amazing, and then they go post about it, and then somebody's like, oh, should I check it out? And then that cycle keeps going. Yeah. And so Netflix has a lot of different models of how they choose to pick up shows. Like some, if they're Netflix originals, they might do it immediately, or if it's a show like Avatar: The Last Airbender that started on Nickelodeon and then came over just in reruns, and it did so well on Netflix for months that they were like, hey, there's something here, and reached out to Nickelodeon, and now there's Avatar Studios that's making new shows and new movies, and it's one of those things where don't let up on the gas, so to speak. Just keep watching.
I don't think we are. Yeah, if anything, Prodigy fans have shown.
Keep watching, everybody.
Yeah, we are passionate. We are here for this. We'll fly as many planes as it takes, have as many pizza parties, whatever we've got to do.
Sure. Well, I think that this show, its longevity is going to be as how well it continues to be, talked about and evangelized by the fans, and that's what folks like y'all are doing.
That's what we're trying to do. Yeah, we'll certainly keep generating the noise, keep the conversation going, and I hope Netflix is taking note. They've got a passionate fan base. We do want more. We want to give you more work.
Thank you.
Now, just out of curiosity, now we've obviously dealt with a lot of time travel over both seasons, and it is a very popular track trope. I mean, every single production has dealt with time travel one way or another, and of course, recently we also had Section 31 brought in various series. So it's time, pardon the pun, to probably look at other storytelling devices. When season 3 happens, is there a particular something that you would personally love to explore with the crew, especially and as well as whatever legacy characters that are already on board or might come along?
The short answer is yes. I have a notepad note on my phone that's about 7 pages long that says Prodigy season 3 ideas.
Nice.
I don't necessarily want to give them up, because I want to save them for when the
yes, please use them.
Inevitably happen.
All of them.
But what I will say is I think the way we ended season 2 leaves a very open door to a lot of possibilities, both dealing directly with legacy of stuff that we've already seen happens, but for the most part, the 2380s going into the 2390s is a very wide open space. Like almost nothing has been defined in that period of time.
Yeah. That's true.
And it's at a time, as we've shown, that Starfleet is a little bit on its heels because they're undermanned and undershipped, and so those lone ships that are out in the cosmos have sort of an outsized importance, even if they're on a goodwill mission, like our Prodigy crew is now.
Yeah.
I think exploring a training ship also is something that has been alluded to going all the way back to, I think Captain Pike says it in the original TOS pilot. What is this? Number one training ship? And so I think seeing how a working training ship really functions when it's not already been upended like the Valiant and Deep Space Nine.
Deep Space Nine, that's right.
I think it's a really exciting proposition. We also see a training ship, interestingly enough, in the USS Enterprise. People forget that in Wrath of Khan,
that's right.
When Kirk commandeers the Enterprise, it has been relegated to being a training ship. It's all cadets aboard that are learning how to
Spock's cadets, no less.
Yeah, Spock's cadets, and they're learning how to use the EPS conduits and that sort of thing. And then suddenly, we're gonna go fight the greatest villain that's ever lived.
No pressure.
Oh, okay, sir. So I get my point is like when a venture calls, your rank is not necessarily as important as the contents of your character.
Yes.
And I think that, especially now that they are ensigns and they are officially sort of diplomatic envoys to the outer reaches beyond the Federation's borders, anything could happen.
Yeah, they've certainly got the strength of character. That's for sure.
I was wondering, now obviously animation allows you to do incredible number of things. Would you think a live action Prodigy would work? To have I'm thinking about the crossover that we had between Lower Decks and Strange New Worlds. Would something like that work with Prodigy, do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I think both Brett Gray and Ella Purnell have both said they're like, yeah, paint me purple. I
I love it.
And thankfully, I think both of them kind of resemble their counterparts. Ella Purnell has very unmistakably large and expressive eyes.
Yes.
And Brett Gray, is just as cheeky in person as his Dal RL counterpart is.
They've got that energy. Yeah.
And I think that you could easily make up Jason Mantzoukas into enough Tellarite stuff that you would buy him as a Tellarite.
Personally, I would love to see that.
Yeah. And Zero, I think, would be easy because they don't have a mouth. So it's just a CGI floating ball that, you don't have to worry about lip shapes and that sort of thing.
Now, getting D. Bradley Baker into the Murph costume, I'm not sure how that's going to go.
I would think that would, I don't know. I love practical effects.
What did you have for it?
Maybe they do like a Babu Frick kind of creature, like he'd be like a puppet.
Okay, I could totally see that happening.
Yeah.
Now, I know we don't have you for very long. We have a couple of like lightning round questions, but we have had ongoing things that we've wanted to ask somebody that we've kept notes of as we've done the show. And so now we're going to ask you.
All right.
So the first one is, it's about melanoid slimeworm anatomy. How did the computer in The Fast and the Curious assimilate Murph?
So I think that Murph is somewhat analogous to a butterfly, insofar as, I'm not sure if you know this about butterfly anatomy, but when a butterfly metamorphoses and enters a chrysalis, its body effectively melts. It turns to goo, but it has like substructures that remain intact. They're basically its nervous system floating in this goo. Okay. So I think that Murph is probably something analogous to that, where this thing was able to latch onto him, and perhaps via psychic manipulation, which we have shown even the Borg have a very strong sort of psychic power. It manipulated him enough to allow the probe to penetrate whatever it needed to penetrate.
Gotcha. All right. So,
well, just out of curiosity, I mean, can Murph basically, I don't know, evolve indefinitely? Is there like a limit to stages of development?
I mean, when we first pitched the idea of Murph, I think he came out of the writer's room week 1 on Prodigy of like, wouldn't it be fun to have a character like this that starts as like an animal or a pet, and then you realize there's more going on. I think somebody had found some concept art of this like sort of soldier with like that happened to have like a slug face, and we were like, well, what if he eventually evolves all the way to that and beyond? And we loved that idea.
Nice.
Murph is the best.
He is. But you know who else is also pretty much up there? It's Zero. And I love his corporeal body.
Beautiful.
And yeah, we very recently discussed Is There in Beauty No Truth? And I have to ask, the inspiration for the corporeal bodies for the folks on that planet, is that inspired at all by Angus Emery? Because he's kind of a tall, lanky guy. Like there's similarities in the facial features. And maybe that's a question for the art department, but what do you know?
I don't know if it was specifically inspired by Angus Emery, but it wouldn't surprise me. I think the instructions we gave them was to have the bodies be sort of lithe and alien, but with a certain grace to them. And maybe that describes Angus Emery.
Something that I wondered, and I suspect it may have been discussed on X, and I just completely missed it. Now we have, an emergency situation on the ship. Everybody rushes out to the escape pods and leaves. Jillian the whale, is there like a whale-sized escape pod on Voyager 8 that would just kind of, I don't know, drop the whole pool out?
Indeed, there is. If you go all the way back to the Star Trek Next Generation technical manual, you will see that in the engineering for even the Enterprise D, where they have cetacean ops, they also have cetacean life pods that are there. They're essentially escape pods.
I remember you posting that on Twitter now.
Oh, there is? Okay, because I must have missed it. And I was like, how would Jillian save herself? This is awful. This is also one of the things that I've been... something that I've been also wondering about. Now, Loom is a spectacular monster. Are they in any way inspired by the Langoliers? That has been kind of on my mind all this time.
Yes-ish. So the idea of creatures that feed on time or erase people from time or erase realities is not necessarily a unique concept. I think TV Tropes even has a whole category. They call them clock roaches.
Clock roaches.
Yeah, but they all have a slight spin on them. And I personally was haunted by the Langoliers, both the short story by Stephen King and the TV
the miniseries, movie.
That came out years ago that had, what was it, like Bronson Pinchot was in it or somebody?
Yes. Yeah.
That stuck with me for ages, and that the premise of that, if you don't know it, is that the so they fly through Aurora Borealis in like a 747. And when they land, all the people are gone. Nothing tastes right. The water is flat. And they realize that somehow they have landed in yesterday. And then there's there are creatures that emerge from the woodwork, or there's sort of that feast on that reality and eat it. And they have to fly away from them back through Aurora Borealis to get back to the present day. So yeah, there's the Langoliers. There's also, I think they're called the Reavers in Doctor Who.
Yes.
Yep.
There's also the Davidians that we see in Time's Arrow.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
That also feed on paradox energy. So like all of these are kind of like threads that we kind of pulled together into this sort of natural force that we wanted to create something that evoked the same kind of dread that the Borg did when you first encountered them back in Who, where they seemed completely unstoppable, unknowable, relentless, and were used as an object lesson by Q to say, you're not ready, you can't face this. And that's what we wanted to create with the loom, something that even travelers would be afraid of.
Yeah, it certainly worked. I mean, Langoliers terrified me as a child. So in this case, I mean, I saw the teeth. I'm like, oh my God, it's Langoliers. This is awful.
Yes.
No, to kind of finish on a bit of a fun one. Now you've told this story. I've heard it actually multiple times. Way back in December of 2006, you set the record for most T-shirts worn at once, an actual Guinness World Record. At the time, I believe it was 160. The current record is definitely over 200, 250.
Yeah, I think it's 250 or something.
So
like that.
was that a challenge? What's the story behind it?
So
How did you end up doing something like that?
So this was indeed in Bloomington, Indiana, and I had just graduated college, and I didn't have a job to my name, and barely had any money in my bank account, and my whole unknown future lying in front of me. And I was like, you know what? When else am I going to have the wherewithal to try to do something like this? And I knew I would never be the world's fastest man or the tallest man, but I could dagnabbit, I could be the person that wore the most T-shirts in the world.
Why not?
I was at the skinniest. I was at my absolute skinniest at that time because I biked everywhere around Bloomington, while carrying 20 pounds of books on my bag in my bag, and so I could squeeze into just about any size shirt. So it was size XXXL or XXX extra small XXXS, going up to size 13 XXL.
No kidding. Wow.
And I wore, I think, 10 of each shirt just to kind of keep track of it. And it wound up being about 100 pounds of fabric, and it's constrictive because it's fabric. So it was like a tourniquet on all my limbs. And every time we put on a T-shirt, I had to pull it away from my carotid artery because otherwise I would pass out and die.
Oh my gosh. There's a time and a place for everything. It's called college.
Yeah, it was definitely a last hurrah of college. And so we did it as a publicity stunt for my sketch comedy group that I was a part of at IU. And sure enough, like about 450 people showed up to watch me do this insane thing and then watch some comedy afterwards.
Yeah,
so it worked. That's great.
Since it's an official record, so somebody came from Guinness to actually witness it, sign off on it.
So they had two possibilities. Either we could pay to fly them out, which I couldn't because I was a poor college student, or they said if you videotape it and take photos, and follow these rules we've given you, then you also that will count. And so I had a photographer friend and videographer friends as a filmmaker, and we just made a day of it. And to this day, it's gotten me multiple jobs. In fact, I think the first time I met with Secret Hideout, I went in there, and as soon as I walked in, before I could say a word about Star Trek, the Hagemans were like, yeah, and then he just broke the Guinness World Record. And I was like, what? And then we proceeded to talk about that for about 30 minutes, and then our time was up, and it's like, all right, well, bye. And then the Secret Hideout was like, wait, we need to talk about Star Trek for a second.
Oh my gosh, that is fantastic.
Great. Aaron, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. And so where can people find you online so they can, keep up with everything that you're doing?
Sure. Yeah, you can find me on pretty much all social media, Instagram, the app formerly known as Twitter, Blue Sky, threads as at Good Aaron, GOODAARON. I always try to keep people up to date and abreast of all of the projects I'm working on, or anything cool that people happen to share with Star Trek Prodigy. You can also follow the Star Trek Prodigy Writers Room account, which is specifically dedicated to Star Trek Prodigy. They're pretty good about retweeting like fan art and any kind of new stuff that comes about. And that's at Trek Prodigy Room on Twitter.
Nice.
So,
very good. Any conventions that you're going to later this year?
This was a busy year for conventions for me. I think back to back I did Comic-Con and then STLV, and I will tell
that's a lot right there.
As a new dad, that definitely wiped me out.
Oh my gosh, I believe it.
But I don't have any other conventions specifically, but if any conventioneers are listening, like if you invite me and fly me out, I'll do it because I love talking about Star Trek.
Never got the impression. No. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for all that you do online, interacting with fans. When people have questions, you come out with answers. It's very awesome. And you're friends to everybody. You're lovely. Thank you so much.
I wish every interview just ended with like, you're a lovely person.
You are a lovely person, Aaron Waltke. Declaring it right here. Mission Log Prodigy is produced by Roddenberry Entertainment. Production and technical direction is by Earl Green. Our website and your opportunity to comment and connect with us is at missionlogpodcast.com. And if you want to support Mission Log directly, you can do so at patreon.com/missionlog. Till next time, everybody, live vlogs and proper and go fast.
This is a Roddenberry podcast. For more great podcasts, visit podcast.roddenberry.com.